All right, welcome to our lecture for today. We are talking about the warm demander, and you will see more about this in your textbook through your reading and also in the other half of the lecture as well. But we have a really amazing opportunity right now because we actually have Tyler Jones with us. He is a clinician in Seattle, Washington, and he primarily works with children and adolescents. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity for education and the psychology counseling world to come together because I think both aspects are so important for us to think about. We a lot of times think about behaviorism in education, but also we have to think about the more internal instances that are happening for children. So thanks so much for being with us today, Tyler. This is also, in case you didn't catch it with our last names, he's also my brother, and we both entered the help fields, and we love talking about all these different aspects and figuring out ways to bring this together. So this is a lecture we've actually planned for quite some time. So Tyler, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do in Seattle, Washington?
Yeah. And again, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with you all. And
Absolutely.
I do think that this is a very important conversation to be able to talk more about the intersection of mental health as well as the education field. I think they have a lot in common.
Yes.
But yeah, as for me, I am a mental health clinician here in Seattle, and I work at a community mental health agency, which is just a really long way to say I'm a therapist. And specifically, I work with, like Dr. Jones has said, is that I work with children and adolescents specifically, and also from all different walks of life, different backgrounds, and yeah, that's kind of the demographic of what I do.
Awesome. Well, yes, it's a very important field because he is seeing behind the scenes from what we can't see. So we're in the classroom, we see students every day, we're seeing content taking place, and we have maybe up to 26 to 30 students in our room, and we have to keep things at a pretty good pace, but sometimes some things can fall through the cracks. And some students have a lot more issues and stresses and anxiety and things that we might not catch that he is seeing. So he's giving us a good insight of what is really happening with these students and what we really need to watch out for. So, a little bit of an overview for this lecture. These are the three main things that we have to focus on as teachers, besides obviously the content portions and everything else we're talking about. When we're talking about the warm demander, this is key. So first, do we know what societal pressures our students are facing? Do we know that there's cyberbullying going on? Do we know that there's peer pressure and stress and home life issues? There's so much going on besides what we can see on the surface. Second, are are we warm demanders in the classroom? And we're going to define that more here in a little bit, but this is key to being a successful and just a really memorable teacher in a positive light for our students. And then finally, are we able to manage behavior effectively in the classroom? And at the same time, are we able to regulate our own emotions? Because we are not robots, and some days we come in and we're tired, we're stressed, we're angry, we have our own home life things going on. So, how do we regulate that in the face of challenges in the school day? So, I think you're going to love this lecture. It's the most, probably the unique combination that I've seen while being in the education field that we can come together like this. So, have a series of questions for you, 6 to be precise. So, first of all, what are some of the current statistics related to the mental health of children? And also, can you go ahead and define what mental health is so we can get a good grasp of that?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, mental health is defined basically as a person's psychological well being. I know many of you have probably seen a self help book here and there, but the idea of being mentally healthy is being able to adapt to your environment, to the stressors that are around you, and transition using helpful coping skills and being flexible when those times happen. And specifically, when someone is having a mental illness, which we'll call as someone who is not mentally healthy. It shows as common buzzwords that you've probably heard, which is anxiety, depression, and other more common things for the educators as ADHD, PTSD, and ADD, all the different all the different acronyms here, but lots of different things to define that and things that I actually work with personally in my career path.
And that's amazing that you mentioned that, just because in our last couple lectures we've talked about high incidence disabilities and low incidence disabilities. So for y'all to remember, think back to our high incidence disability lecture. So of course ADHD is under the OHI category. So we talked about OHI as other health impairment. So within ADHD and emotional behavior disorder, EBD, we saw that this is very common because there's the externalized behaviors that we talked about and the internalized behaviors. And internalized behaviors can have more of the symptoms of anxiety, depression. And then of course, if students have had trauma in their life, which is happening more and more, whether it's home life or situational, we don't know every piece of it, but there is PTSD and trauma that we are facing in the schools. And we have to learn how to deal with this, or we're just going to be continually unprepared to help our students.
Yeah, and I think that's awesome that you guys are learning that, specifically seeing as mental health is something that I believe that all teachers will inevitably interact with when working with students. Especially given, I know you were talking about statistics, and especially given the statistics that are happening right now, specifically educators, I would say, of children between the ages of 6 and 15 is a very, very, very common age, and also very formative year, like gap of year for when kids are developing. And so they'll definitely show that within school. I mean, school is going to be the primary place that they'll be throughout their week. And that means that also the educators will be around them too. Some common mental health concerns, like we were mentioning, ADHD, depression, anxiety. There's been studies that have recently been done that have been steadily showing that it's been steadily increasing from year to year. A study specifically has shown that in children from 5 to 17, that it has doubled. I can't even speak right now, I apologize. Has doubled over the past decade for admittance for hospitalizations regarding thoughts of suicide or self-harm or attempts of suicide. And that's something, I mean, specifically I can attest to in this, and working in a community mental health agency. There have been several cases of this, unfortunately, and are even cases where kids as young as 7 are contemplating death by suicide. Furthermore, there's other studies, there's other surveys that have been done. Specifically, this one's for people in higher education. They studied incoming college freshmen, and they asked them if they were feeling the pressures of higher education or feeling overwhelmed, and they would mark yes or no to that. And in 2016, 41% of students said yes, compared to 28% in 2000 and 18% in 1985. And this is kind of the trajectory of how mental health is declining, and is a really common thing that we need to be having more discussion about, specifically inside the education realm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I did want to mention too, since we were on that topic, and I know being in college is stressful. I mean, it's overwhelming, and add in a pandemic to that, and we're talking statistics are probably going to go up quite a bit after they study 2020. So I wanted to offer and just remind you, I know I posted this early on in the announcements, but please never be shy to call the counseling center if you just feel stressed, overwhelmed, in a dark place. It happens to everybody at some point in time. So I just wanted to include the phone number and email address in case you did ever want to reach out, or if you have any friends who are in a really bad place, I wanted to offer you a resource since we're talking about this. And then also when you're in the classroom, and either that or in your personal lives or friends, this is the suicide hotline. We have to take these things seriously, and we are mandated reporters as well. if you catch wind that some student is hurting themselves or someone is hurting them, or if they have any uh, potential thoughts about suicide, we are required to report this. So I just wanted to give you these resources.
Yeah, we as educators and clinicians are not immune to these mental health issues. And it's not something to be ashamed of. And that's one of the biggest reasons why we want to talk about it here, is to destigmatize that idea that it's weak to reach out for help, or weak to be hurting or to be sad and not really know what's going on, and to reach out for help. And so I'm really glad that you did provide those resources, and hope that you all will feel the comfort to be able to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for helping guiding us in this conversation. So, why is this happening? We're seeing a crazy increase in these different types of anxiety, suicidal thoughts, depression. What are some possible reasons?
Yeah. I think going along the similar studies that we were just mentioning, there's a lot of research that hypothesizes that much of this increase in anxiety and depression and other mental health issues can be attributed to the growing expectations in education and pressure to succeed, which, I mean, which of us who's been in an education scenario has not felt the pressure to have to get an A, or to have to try to figure out how to be better, or to do something better, or to be better than our other peers inside of the classroom. And secondly, the world is growing more scary and threatening. As we're seeing, 2020 has been a very chaotic year. I don't think it's just been for me, but I'm sure for many people. And it's something that we are having to come to more grips of. How do we maintain a positive and somewhat stable and grounded personhood while going through all these hardships? And thirdly, social media is huge. Social media, for me specifically, even being in the community mental health agency, many of my clients really struggle with how they see themselves, how they perceive their own self-worth, given how they interact with people on social media, given the comments that they receive. And it's a new up and coming, I don't think it's new, but it's definitely something that is a lot more ingrained in this new generation that's coming up. So
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is one of the most important talks that we can have. I know it's not talking about content, but if we don't get a hold of this and realize what's happening, we're missing the boat. So with social media, I would recommend, if you have a Netflix account, watch the show called Social Dilemma if you haven't already. And that talks about what cell phones are doing to our society and to students and adolescents. So I found it quite interesting that it's psychological. The people who created this social media platform, and Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all of the above, they do it purposefully. So first of all, it releases dopamine every time they get a like. So they want more. It becomes an addiction. And also they start judging themselves and comparing themselves to other students. It's a very easy platform for social bullying and cyberbullying, to happen. And that's a big problem, because if a student's telling them they're ugly and the student doesn't have to look them in the eye and say this, it can happen more and more, and there's very little accountability. It's literally becoming an addiction, to the point where I always joked about it as a teacher. It's their second hand, trying to get it out of their hand in the classroom. And I will say, I'm going to add this little extra point in here. When I was in the classroom, I would have the classroom totally under control. And then all of a sudden, a girl would start bursting out crying, and I would think, what is happening? And a boy broke up with her through text. And I've had a situation where someone bullied them, and then they just, they're getting so much input, and it's affecting, like you said, their self-worth, their ability to see themselves. They think they're only worth it if they have enough likes, and they can start getting depressed and think, I'm not worth living. And it's very tragic what's going on right now. So thanks for bringing that up.
so little time to slow down, and so little time to just be who they are, without having the extra added pressure of other voices coming in. So that's a really good point.
Oh, absolutely. So, my second question for you, so as an adolescence counselor, what experiences have you had that reflect these findings that we just talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I specifically, so with the community mental health agency that I work in, I work both inside of schools, or at least did. I know there's a lot of new different things happening where schools are online and partially in school and partially not. But I also see clients at an agency. So I get kind of that both worlds, the both and. So there's school and then also the agency. And I would say about 75% of my clients that I have been seeing are seeing me due to anxiety that was presenting at school. Specifically, meaning that there's teachers, just like whom you are gearing to become, have seen these kiddos like be in the classroom and showing signs of anxiety or depression or acting out, showing those external behaviors that happen sometimes for them, and they will send them to a mental health professional who can help them kind of work through those different things, as myself would. And many of these kids are also struggling, if it's not with school or inside of school, it's with their home environment, friends, and other stressors that affect the way they engage at school, and specifically too with their friends. So that's definitely been something that I see quite often in this field.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just increasing, and you're seeing students who, they could have stressors at home as well, but they often talk about the stress that they have at school, and maybe their teachers just aren't seeing it and recognizing it, and it's just coming to the point where they need to talk to somebody else. But we also, if we can acknowledge it as teachers, we could be the first front lines to help our students before it gets to a really negative point for them. And actually, on that line of topic there, have your clients ever reported the effects of negative interactions with teachers?
I very much so. Working with this population, of course, requires me to be able to come at their care with a team care perspective. And what that kind of means is that I work alongside of the student, I work alongside of the parent, as well as teachers. And inside of that, I don't want to speak negatively, because I do want to encourage the fact that teachers have a very positive effect in kids' life. And I believe it's a really crucial piece of their development. But beginning with more of the negative experiences I've heard about in interactions with students and teachers, I've definitely heard that there's students who feel like they are not really seen or not very understood for who they are and their identity. Maybe things are really stressful and they feel like the teacher was not understanding, or they didn't get called on, or maybe a teacher was super harsh. Those are all different examples of cases that I have seen personally, and examples of how I believe teachers do have a big impact on students, specifically to be able to even harm them. But also, I've heard a lot of benefits with teachers too, of hearing my interactions with these clients, and where a client will say, so and so, this teacher came up to me and asked me how I'm doing today, or they saw that I was sitting alone and they came and ate lunch with me. And the whole session that we'll be sitting there, they'll just be talking about how much that meant to them and how much their day is so different. And this client is, meanwhile, at home and struggling with a really hard home environment. And that might have been one of the very few times that they felt cared for by a person. And that was by their teacher. And so they definitely have a huge effect on students.
Absolutely. I mean, we have the power to bring joy and happiness to them, and also we have to understand too that there's a flip side to everything, that our words bring power, whether they're positive or if they're negative. And actually, before I move into that one, just thinking about, as a teacher, we have to remember, and I know it's hard to think about this until you actually get in there, and I never thought this would happen to me, but it happens. You have 20 some students sitting in front of you, and it's fast paced. You almost start to look at it in a collective way, and you lose that individual mentality if you don't try to make sure to attempt that, because it's easy to say, okay, I've got these 20 students, they're behaving, they're getting content, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. And lo and behold, you have 5 students in your classroom who are going under the radar and having significant issues. Or maybe you snapped that day and you yelled at a student, and you just roll on with life, and you don't know that that student thinks about that every day and is upset about it, and is talking to you about this on an individual level. So we have to, as a teacher, know that things are collective. We have to view things like that, but also everything is very individual to them. So just keeping that in mind. So I thank you for this perspective that you're bringing. So I wanted to ask as well, what role do teachers play in this growing concern of this mental health, the decline, and also in the need for the increase of mental health awareness?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a piece where it's really apparent that teachers are underappreciated in this area. And teachers don't hear enough how important of a role they play in kids' lives. We often will, especially even in the psychological world, we think, oh, it's just the caregivers, like who they grew up with, but it's also who we're around throughout our days, through who we're hanging out with, who is teaching us and guiding us, and it doesn't have to just be our caregivers. I do believe that teachers play a key role in kids' development. And whether that's positive or negative is really, really up to how you approach it. I want to challenge too about how all of us have been through an academic experience, especially being in a higher education moment right here. I think we all have had experiences with a teacher or professor where we feel like, wow, I felt really seen, or I felt really heard. And also we've all had those experiences where we feel like that was a bad experience. I would never want to revisit that. I really don't want to talk to that teacher again. And it's made a lasting effect. I bet even right now, as I'm saying this, you're thinking of a couple people who have been your teacher who you feel like, wow, they really impacted me. Or also like, this was the worst experience. And yeah, that's really true. And kind of along those same lines, I want to continue on expressing how important teachers are in the lives of students, speaking more from a psychological lens. Psychologically speaking, teachers play the role of an attachment figure. And yes, I am becoming a little bit more psychological speaking right now, but bear with me. The attachment theory, which was developed by John Bowlby, basically says the way a child is attached to their caregiver or a significant other determines the way they will continue in their general functioning, whether that's emotionally, academically, just the way that they are. And this theory initially focused on how there's different types of attachment. So there can be a really positive one, which is called secure attachment, and there's some negative ones that tend to give hardships for people as they continue on throughout their lives. Like there's insecure attachment, there's anxious attachment, there's avoidant, there's these different types, but mainly why I'm using this theory here is to talk more about the secure attachment. And what is involved in a secure attachment is being able to have that consistency, a safe space, an empathic care coming from that person, and an unconditional positive regard, which basically just means they see you as good no matter whether you have those flaws. There's that both and. You're not just good and you're not just bad. You are good, and we can pull that out of you in some way. And the reason why I bring this up right now is that this theory did initially focus on parent-child interaction, or how the caregiver and the child, how they would build that, and that's how the child grew. But as this theory has continued to develop, they have found that those who play a wiser or older guide, wiser older guide, I want to put those together, for children or adolescents, or even a close friend to an individual, they have just as much of an impact as their caregiver in the development of who they are, and specifically of their self-worth and their functionality. This includes educators. And so this is why I'm bringing this up, is I want to be able to encourage and to kind of have a little bit of a psychological background to show you that teachers really do have a really deep impact on the mental health as well as just the goodness of how the students are growing and on their journey of education.
So let me ask you this as well, and this is something you'll probably know more about. So if somebody, let's say you get two students, right? One
Mhm.
student has a parent or teacher or someone who's constant in their life who provides a very secure attachment. So the chances in the future, right, are that they will have more secure attachments in their future or know how to have secure attachments. So that's
Yes.
putting them in a trajectory, if I could say that, to go in a positive direction and have good relationships, right? But
Yes.
on the flip side, if a child has a caregiver or someone constant, a teacher or older sibling who is not a secure attachment, who maybe is here and there, who might yell at them one day but is kind to them the next day, who's very not just unstable mostly, then the
Mhm.
chances of them connecting to unstable relationships in the future is more likely. Is that how it works?
Correct. And not only just even having hardship with connecting with other people, but really connecting with themselves. They
Mm-hmm.
have a hard time regulating. And so it leads to when something does go a little bit awry or something is off in the room or there's a transition or there's a stressor, they won't really know how to regulate. They become someone who becomes dysregulated and will show symptoms of someone who is really angry or basically just engaging in externalizing behavior. Um, and of course, like I think you had talked about that you had talked about externalizing and internalizing, but
Mm-hmm.
that's a really big piece here too.
Which is interesting because when we see students in the classroom and you might say, get out your textbook, and all of a sudden a student flies off the handle, that's them being, they're not able to regulate their emotions, which oftentimes shows that they've had insecure attachments in their past and they need someone to teach them what a secure attachment looks like. So if we fly off the handle back at them and say, you know what, you just put that textbook back down and I told you, like, you know what I mean, just going off on them just like they are, that's not modeling, okay, here's a appropriate reaction, or teaching them, okay, put your textbook back down, this is how we open it appropriately, guiding them through rather than reacting back.
Yes, and I'm really glad that you're mentioning that too, because when it comes to attachments and the way that you let's use this example that you're using with this kid who can't handle the transition from what you were doing previously to get out your book and open it. This kid has learned that transition is unstable. Like whatever's happening, you can't be in there, and that's really scary. And I'm scared right now. But the only way they know to say I'm scared is to act out.
Mm-hmm.
And in that space, when we have that kind of that formed way of wanting to react, like that kid has the way to react to say like I'm upset and to throw the book or to get mad. Um, People who are secure attachment figures have the ability, when being able to exemplify and model what that looks like and provide a containing space, a safe space for that kid, they're able to rebuild even, and this is going into a really deep psychological realm, but be able to rebuild the brain structure of that kid to be able to start learning how to regulate when something does transition. It's a huge thing for
Yes.
kids.
Which I think this is so important because I know we're going to talk about the analytical behavior side. And I know there's a lot you can do on the surface to change that behavior. So we're definitely going to talk through all of that. But these are the things that you can actually change that neurological pathway in a way of modeling how do you appropriately handle frustrating situations. And we have to model that ourselves. So that's pretty much what we're talking about because as a teacher, it is very we don't know until we're out there. It is very hard to do some days when you're tired, you're stressed, you haven't had your coffee, whatever it might be, you're just done. And so it's good to have this in the back of your mind. So that's a really good,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a good point that you made.